What is good, ladies and gentlemen? Mr. Coast here, back with another video. I have a new mic. I am uploading. What more could you guys ask for? Other than decent content. But that you're not going to get that. Not from this channel, at least. I do have a Twitch that you can go follow, that I will be doing gaming stuff on. So, check that out if you want. Or if you don't have to, I'm not your dad. Do whatever, faggot. I don't care. Anyway, today we're doing some completely original content. It's a Reddit reading on r/nosleep, posted by user Crash and Burnout. Tree people. I grew up in the Ozark National Forest, way off the old dusty roads that ran near the township of Fern. Nothing special, no stores, pretty much nothing but a bunch of meth-fueled hillbillies, hunters, and poor Southern gospel types. I lived in an old dirt road. There was nothing to do when I was real little except walk that road and explore the forest and creek beds. I'm the oldest of 4 sisters by 7 years, so most of my time was spent off alone trying to avoid them. I had secret hideouts all over the woods, stashes of baby dolls, antique dishes, little girl things hidden throughout all of the little winding roots of the ancient trees. They're probably still there. Down the road's ways back off into the woods, there was a small creek and a little old family plot or potter's cemetery. The stones were old. I imagine the old writing had worn off from the unpredictable weather in the region. You never know how the weather down there was gonna be in one day until the next. If I had to guess, though, I'd say that the old graveyard was probably from around the Civil War era. Now, I'd always heard whispers about things from folk, the neighbour kids, my mama's friends, when they would walk over and sit in our kitchen. And hunters would always be sure to stop on their ATVs to tell me, "Y'all need to stay out of them woods." Oh, they're a little, whispers of a lot of things. Leaf rustlers, Sasquatch, Wendigos, little people, etc. You see, people sometimes just disappear in the Ozark National Forest, nothing left but their boots. And everyone was always worried about us girls. I still love to roam those woods, creek beds, and old dirt roads, though. I never did believe much in all that stuff, even as such a little child. I was more worried about getting bit by a snake, or mauled by a bear, or being attacked by an old buck in a rut. Thinking back on it, it's only by the grace of God that I'm still alive, as many close calls with all those wonderful creatures I did have back in them woods. It was the summer of 2001 when I first thought I saw them. We had a big thunderstorm the night before. It rained hard, hardest I'd ever seen it rain. I could remember those roads were a muddy mess, and I was down there playing beaver in the ditches that ran alongside them, building dams of rocks and sticks, mud and leaves. Very important business for a 10-year-old child. Mr. Ray from down the road had pulled up alongside of me in his big green truck to warn me to stay out of the creek that ran alongside the old cemetery. "Now, Miss Anne, you need to stay out of that water back yonder. I see you playing down there all the time, and it's moving too fast today. It'll sweep you up and carry you all the way to the ocean if you get in there after all this rain," he said. "Yes, sir," I said. To which he replied, "Good girl. Now tell your mama I said hi, and that I'll be by to have a look at y'all's furnace later this evening. Keep an eye out for your little sisters. Goodbye, girl." I smiled at him and shook my head in agreement, waved wildly, and yelled, "Goodbye, Mr. Ray. I'll tell my mama you said have a good day." All the while knowing my first thing I was gonna do as soon as that man's truck was out of sight was go straight to the muddy old creek he had just told me to stay away from. The little creek that ran alongside the old graveyard was usually what one might call a fair weather creek. I suspect it was created by the runoff of the nearby mountains and hills, maybe 2 or 3 feet at its deepest points. When it even had water flowing through it, it had about 5 or 6 feet wide. Some might call it a stream, but we always called it a creek. It was just an hour or two before twilight when Mr. Ray came through and left, and I started off into the woods and that creek and an old game trail I like to use as my path. The air was hot and dense, pretty typical of a hard rain down in that area. I could hear what sounded like a quiet roar in the distance. I had always noticed what sounded like the occasional giggle coming from the trees that surrounded me. I was a logical child and brushed it off to be the sounds of birds chirping and branches creaking from the weight of the heavy rain the night before. When I finally got to the creek, I immediately came to the conclusion that Mr. Ray was an honest and trustworthy man. As the little creek, it had seemed, had turned into a dangerous and swift river, its banks nearly reaching the boundaries of the odd plot on the other side. The water was dark with sediment from the forest floor, and little sticks and leaves raced and swirled within its borders. Once you got close, the creek was so loud that you almost couldn't even hear yourself think, booming and thundering. The sounds of the water flowing quickly over the rocks and branches and dragging whatever wasn't rooted in well right along with it. There I was, standing right where the neighbor had told me not to go, staring into the water and contemplating in my adolescent mind how I was going to ever get across to the other side. Despite the violent thrashing sound of all that water, I thought I heard something else. I quickly raised my head and glared into the trees nearby. I could hear something like murmurs, like many people speaking all around me. Weird birds, I thought to myself. Soon, I spotted a narrowed area in the creek. I looked around for a branch or a log I could lay across, and eventually found one. I had to act quickly. The sun would be setting shortly, and I needed to make it to the graveyard and back across before nightfall. The mission was important, but I was a logical child and knew that graveyards were filled with ghosts once the sun sets. As soon as I found what seemed like a large, sturdy branch, I went straight to work. First, I tested it by standing on top and jumping up and down a few times. Once I was satisfied that the old twig would bear my weight, I began to pull it down to the bank, to the narrow point in the water, yanking on, shoving and rolling that long, skinny hunk of stump. I finally got it to across a small section of the rubbing river. Relief. My mission might conclude today after all. The moment I stepped onto the thing, I heard the loudest, shrillest scream I'd ever heard in my life. I stopped dead in my tracks. Mama caught me directly disobeying Mr. Ray, and I was fixing to get a noswhooping of a lifetime. I slowly looked up, anticipating the sharp sting of her. What the hell is the matter with you, girl? Look. What I saw, instead, terrified me more than one of my mother's looks, and whatever I had ever thought of. Across from me, across the creek in the tree line, next to the old cemetery, there was at least 30 people, men, women, and children. Strange as it is, it seemed they weren't people at all, or at least not anymore. They were all barefoot, and their skin was dark and reddish like the clay along the sides of the road. It looked rough and dirty, kind of like bark, or the bark of a cedar tree or something. Their hair matted with moss, leaves, and twigs. Their faces were motionless as they peeked out from behind the branches and the oaks and the evergreens. The thing that struck me most about them, though, was the way their eyes looked. As the sun was shining and the forest was becoming dark, and I was faced with all these strangers, their eyes are what bewildered me the most. They all seemed to have white eyes. It was almost like they glowed. Hastily, I stepped back onto the bank of the creek, obviously aborting my previous expedition, unforeseen circumstances. Just then, my makeshift bridge washed down the creek, hit a large rock, and burst into what seemed like a million pieces. Seizing this opportunity, I turned and ran as fast as I could back onto the road, where Mr. Ray had stopped me previously a few hours earlier. I could hear the murmurs and giggles all around as I ran back through them woods. I didn't even look back. In fact, being a logical child who eventually grew into a logical adult, I never went back to that particular spot at all. I still roamed the old dirt roads for a few more years before Mama packed us up and moved us all to town. Sometimes I go back and drive those old roads, and I swear I can see the silhouettes of people out there in those trees. I don't know what their intentions were that day, but sometimes I think maybe they only wanted to save me from getting washed the way down the ocean. Sometimes I wonder if maybe they planned to take me away from my mama and my family. All I know is for sure is that the folks still go missing in the Ozark National Forest, with nothing left but their boots.
Like a Hellcat.